coverage for millions of American families so that President Trump can orchestrate the largest transfer of wealth from the poor and working class to the ultra-rich that we have ever seen in this country. This bill has nearly $1 trillion in health care cuts, including over $800 billion in Medicaid cuts. In total, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office estimates that this bill would not only add $2.4 trillion to our national deficit, but it also kicks 16 million Americans off of their health insurance in the next 10 years. In Nevada, that means about 95,271 people will lose their health care. 66,571 will be kicked off of Medicaid. These numbers alone should at least give my Republican colleagues pause, make them think about how devastating this bill would be for our working families, and maybe even reconsider moving forward with trying to ram it through Congress. But there's more to this than just these big numbers, and it needs to be brought to light. I was just home in Nevada meeting with Nevadans, hospitals, providers. With the Medicaid cuts they're anticipating from this billionaire tax giveaway, hospitals are bracing themselves not just for coverage losses, but for the downstream impact on care and costs. This is going to affect our most vulnerable populations in Nevada: seniors, children, veterans, parents of children with rare diseases, pregnant women, and our elderly in nursing homes. When people lose coverage, they delay their care. A single mom who's living paycheck to paycheck and is worried about putting food on the table for her kids is not going to go to the doctor if she has a persistent cough. She will wait. But that means that when her cough turns serious, making it harder for her to breathe, she'll have to go to the emergency room for treatment. By then, it's more dangerous for her and more expensive for everyone involved. The hospital she goes to has to treat her, regardless of whether or not she has health insurance. If she can't pay, the hospital is on the hook for the cost of her care. Now, if you are in a rural or underserved area, of which we have many in Nevada and across the country, and the one hospital for miles can't afford to keep those doors open, it may scale back or close altogether. And the hospital staff have to choose which services to cut. Labor and delivery, mental health care, trauma units. These are services entire communities rely on. Or will they be forced to close entirely if they can't make up the costs? In rural Nevada, people sometimes have to drive 2 to 3, 4 hours to see their doctor. A hospital closure would be devastating for rural families trying to access even basic care. That's the danger we are facing with this bill. This isn't just about Medicaid patients. As providers look to cover the cost of treating more uninsured patients, those expenses will shift to everyone, to working families and to employers. Premiums and out-of-pocket costs will soar. Also, that this president and Republicans can pay for tax cuts for billionaires. You know, this is always also going to impact Nevadans who rely on the Affordable Care Act for their medical insurance. Republicans, in their bill, cuts almost $300 billion from the ACA marketplace plans. And that would kick about 29,000 Nevada small business owners, middle-class families, and legal immigrants like Dreamers off their health care. It would also increase Medicare premiums for over 1 million seniors, and it could end health care coverage for 1.5 million children. These are real people who are going to lose their coverage as a result of this bill. And this impact would be lasting. This bill is so expensive that it would force Congress to make even more Medicare cuts in the future. For those who don't immediately get kicked off their health insurance as a result of cuts to Medicaid, my Republican colleagues want to implement burdensome work reporting requirements so they can take away coverage from even more Americans to pay for those billionaire tax cuts. In Nevada, over 67% of Medicaid recipients, they're already working. But if this bill passes, those working families will have to jump through even more government reporting hoops to prove that they work. We know this from states that have tried this, like Arkansas, that people lost Medicaid not because they didn't meet the requirement, but because they couldn't keep up with the red tape. Think about this. People working who already have access to Medicaid, they're making it harder for them to get it, which means that then if you lose your Medicaid and your insurance, there's a possibility that because if your health gets worse, you're going to lose your job. We're going backwards. This bill adds complex paperwork, frequent deadlines, and little flexibility to the everyday lives of hardworking mothers, veterans, and families across the country. And why? Again, because the Republicans' goal is to take Medicaid away from as many people as possible so that they can find revenue to pay for the tax cuts for billionaires. Think about what I said at the beginning. It's the biggest shift in our country of wealth from the poor and the working class to the billionaire class. Instead of making the billionaires pay for this, they're taking it off the backs of the very people that are working in this country in the middle class. And they're preventing from the poor from getting into the middle class, and they're making it harder for the middle class. This is absolutely absurd. It is un-American, and we cannot accept this as our new normal. So, my Democratic colleagues and I are going to continue to stand against this outrageous and dangerous bill because we know that the American public deserves better. Americans deserve a Congress that is helping to lift the poor into the middle class and helping the middle class have their lives a little bit easier. And if we're talking about who should pay their fair share, well, I can guarantee you if we polled Americans, they would say it was the billionaire class. The billionaire class should pay their fair share and not make it harder. Not make it harder for the poor and the working class just to get by and just to get through the day. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
I rise today on behalf of the 228,000 Wisconsinites whose health care is on the chopping block if Republicans get their way. At a time when Wisconsin families are asking us to take on the skyrocketing costs of health care and prescription drugs, congressional Republicans are doing just the opposite. My Republican colleagues are not using their time and energy to go after greedy corporations, not to take on the big drug companies, and not to expand access to affordable health care. But they are instead forging ahead with a bill that will kick millions of Americans off of their insurance and jack up the cost of health care for millions more. I keep hearing my colleagues falsely claim that we are exaggerating how horrible this plan is for working families. They want to pretend these cuts are just going after waste, fraud, and abuse. And I'm not here to engage in a he said, she said about this. The Congressional Budget Office, a nonpartisan analyst, released a new report today and found that the Republican plan will result in 16 million Americans losing their health care. That means that those last-minute changes that were made in the middle of the night in the House resulted in 2 million more people being kicked off their health care. Of those 16 million, nearly 150,000 Wisconsinites will lose their Medicaid coverage. And sadly, it doesn't stop there. This bill is yet another attempt to chip away at the Affordable Care Act. In my state, over 80,000 Wisconsinites will be priced out of their affordable care. And more will see their marketplace coverage costs skyrocket. We are talking about children with disabilities, grandparents, working families, and so many more whose health care is literally right now in jeopardy. I heard from Annette in Kenosha, Wisconsin. She has 3 children, including a 6th grader with severe special needs. She wrote to me about her daughter Maya's first year before they got access to Medicaid. She says, and I quote, "We paid $16,000 out of pocket after insurance for her hospital bills, surgery, and appointments. It destroyed our savings and pushed us to the brink of losing everything. Medicaid is not fraud, waste, or abuse. Medicaid supports kids like Maya who are in desperate need and the families who love them," end quote. She told me that she doesn't plan to stay on Medicaid forever, but that program has been, quote, "a godsend to us right now. It was a rigorous process to qualify. I hope other families like mine will have the support they need to keep their families healthy," end quote. I also heard from Evan in Madison, Wisconsin, who's undergone 2 brain surgeries and subsequent radiation over the last 10 years to treat brain tumors, in part paid for by Medicaid. He wrote to me, and I quote, "I sacrificed a lot to hopefully become a part of the working class. If Trump meddles further with my health care, I won't be able to afford my medication that literally gives me the ability to go out and be a part of my community." Or take Kevin in De Pere, Wisconsin, whose 19-year-old son has Down syndrome and relies on Medicaid for care. Kevin had a message for my colleagues who are considering advancing any cuts to Medicaid. He wrote, "I ask you to remember that Medicaid is not about dollars. It's about dignity, about opportunity, and ensuring that all individuals, regardless of ability, can thrive." For Americans like Kevin and Annette and Evan, Medicaid is a lifeline. Without it, millions of families would forego the care or face almost certain financial ruin. But congressional Republicans are putting all of that on the line, making Americans jump through more hoops and over more red tape to access their life-saving care. And why? To kick enough eligible people off Medicaid to pay for their tax cuts that overwhelmingly benefit corporations and their special interest donors, the very same corporations that jack up the cost of health care on Americans in the first place. And as deep as these cuts are, they fall far short of the total cost of the handouts that the Republicans are proposing in the form of tax cuts for the wealthy and corporations. Their plan won't just kick 16 million Americans off their health insurance or 4 million Americans off of food assistance. The Republicans' plan will also balloon the deficit by $3 trillion over the next decade. While Republicans spend the rest of their summer figuring out how to pass their agenda that puts their campaign donors and corporations ahead of working families, I'll keep raising the alarm bells about the real Wisconsinites whose health and lives are in the balance if they get their way. And I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to join my colleagues in talking about one of the terrible elements of this bill, and that is it's going to take away Medicaid coverage, health care, for this morning, it was 13.7 million people across this country, including Vermont and including Missouri. But we just got an update. It's 16 million people. 16 million people are going to lose health care. And this Medicaid program that provides access to low-income folks, to kids with disabilities, and of course those parents who do so much to care for their child with special needs need that Medicaid to be able to keep body and soul together and give that child that they love the best they can possibly have. It provides health care for 2 out of 3 seniors who are in nursing homes. Medicaid pays for those hospital beds. So how is it that at a time when health care is expensive, it's getting out of reach for more and more people, it is the biggest expense many families face, that we are actually considering in the United States Senate a bill that would take away health care from 16 million people? It's hard to believe that the United States Senate has any degree of appreciation for the reality of the everyday lives of folks who depend on this health care. The legislation also takes away subsidies that have made it affordable for people to buy into the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare. It's the margin that is necessary for thousands, millions of people to be able to continue to get health care coverage through the Affordable Care Act. So we literally have a piece of legislation that is going to take away this health care for individuals. It's going to take away health care from families who are getting access through the Affordable Care Act. This bill also is cutting nutrition programs. You know, the SNAP benefits really matter for lower income families. It's how they feed their kids. And in your community and in mine, we have thousands of volunteers who put together food shelves, community food programs. They do Meals on Wheels. They volunteer to do everything they possibly can to help our kids in school with nutrition, to help with the Meals on Wheels for our seniors, and then, of course, to distribute and help with the SNAP program. Millions of Americans are going to lose that. And by the way, that SNAP benefit, it amounts to about $6 a day, maybe a little more. Hardly a big bonanza, but an incredibly important component of keeping body and soul together. It's the meals that are so essential to the well-being, not just of our seniors, but to our children. So all of this is being done as a way of, quote, paying for legislation that is going to lower taxes. And I don't know how it works for you in Missouri, but when I'm talking to Vermonters, nobody has come up to me and said, Peter, you have got to get to work on getting me that tax cut. Nobody believes there's a tax cut in this bill that's going to be anything at all meaningful to them in their struggles with affording paying their bills at the end of each month. Now, if you're in the uber wealthy class, you'll get $250,000. You know, that's real money. Although for some of those folks who are making millions of dollars a year, there won't even be anything they notice. But why is it that we're pushing through this legislation that will provide a tax cut to folks who, by and large, don't need it, will do very little for working class people, will have a negative impact on their ability to pay their bills, especially ones who are going to lose access to Medicaid, especially folks who are going to lose access to the food stamps or the SNAP benefits that are so essential to their well-being. And that's on top of all of those folks having to pay more because of the tariffs. So this is an assault on the budgets of working families in America. That's what it really is. It's going to shrink their take-home pay at the end of the month. That's literally what it is we're doing. And for what? To provide a tax cut that's not going to be meaningful for the vast majority of Americans who really will end up paying more through tariffs and lost access to health care and nutrition programs than they will ever, even in the wildest stretch of imagination, get from the tax cut, the so-called tax cut bill, the big, beautiful bill. But there's another part of this that's so damaging, and especially for those of us from representing rural America. Individuals need health care, but they can't get health care unless they can go to a community hospital, unless they can go to a community health center, unless they can go to a private practitioner who accepts Medicaid reimbursement. All of those people who lose access to Medicaid to pay those bills are going to continue to show up at the doctor's office. They're going to show up at the emergency room. They're going to go to our community hospitals. They're going to go to our community health centers. And those health centers and those doctors will continue to do everything that they can to provide care, even if they don't get paid. But at a certain point, they can't continue. They can't keep the doors open. They can't pay salaries to staff. They can't pay the light bill. So what this does is not only take away access to health care for individuals, it starts to unravel the health care system to deliver health care to people in the community. Those institutions that lose the modest revenue reimbursements that you get from Medicaid, far less than Medicare, far less than private pay, are going to lose that revenue in those institutions, those hospitals, those practices already operating on a very thin margin are going to go out of business. And then what happens? We put all of the pressure for paying for the healthcare system on the private sector. And what we have seen over and over again is the so-called cost shift. It's a real thing. It's not a so-called cost shift, it's real. So the more money you take out of Medicaid, the more money and more burden you put on the private insurance market. And who pays that? A lot of our employers. You know, in Vermont, and I'm sure this is true in Missouri, our employers really care about, our employers care about their employees. And there's a struggle every year for employers who want to provide employer-sponsored health care when they get the sticker shock of a 10, a 15, a 25% increase in premiums. And that always then forces the discussion about, do we want to give a raise or do we want to just maintain benefits but pay for the higher premium with what would have been your raise? So that's further pressure. So this bill does real harm to individuals, but it really also starts to continue to accelerate the unraveling of a financially insecure medical payment system. So why do we do this? It's hard to answer. You know, it's a theoretical benefit that the theory here is if you lower taxes, we're going to boost the economy. We've been hearing that since Reagan, and that's very much in dispute, especially when the lower taxes go to folks who don't need it, and the folks who are struggling to pay their bills aren't getting much relief and are getting higher costs from tariffs and getting higher costs because they're losing access to health care, and where this is going to weaken our communities. And then, of course, finally, what we're going to see is a significant increase in our debt. And the recent CBO scores, I think, put it at $2.8 trillion. And what are we getting for that? You know, sometimes a country has to borrow, like we did in World War II. Sometimes we have to borrow like we did during COVID. Sometimes we have to borrow to rescue the economy like we did after the 2008 Wall Street crash. And you know why you're doing it. But when you're in better times, where you don't have this market collapse, you don't have this mass pandemic, that is not the time to be adding to the debt. And what it does is it means that in the future, if we do have to borrow for an emergency, our capacity to do it is more limited. And what it is also doing right now is raising interest rates. And as interest rates go up, the cost of debt service on our budget goes up. And right now, the biggest expenditure of taxpayer money is to pay interest on the debt that is escalating exponentially. So we're spending more on debt service than we do on the military. We're spending more on debt service than we do on Medicare, and way more than we are on Medicaid. And by adding to the debt, it's clearly putting pressure on interest rates, raising what it is taxpayers have to pay. So there's nothing good in this bill for the working person or for their small businesses that, when they need to borrow money, are much better off if they can get a lower rate of interest. Or when a family has to get a car loan, they can get a lower rate of interest. Or a mortgage, can they get a lower rate of interest? It's the exact opposite. So we've got families who are paying more because of tariffs, losing a lot because of losing their Medicaid eligibility, and losing their access to the Affordable Care Act, and then everybody paying more because of the high interest associated with the escalation in the debt. Mr. President, we should kill this bill. And I would urge all of my colleagues to take into consideration how this is going to affect the people who each of us represents. You know, there's a bipartisan element to this bill. The bipartisan aspect of this bill is that everybody is going to share the pain of what this bill does. It's folks in the red state, it's the folks in the blue state, whether they voted for pardon me, Harris or they voted for Trump. They lose their Medicaid, that hurts. They lose their community hospital, that hurts. They pay higher interest rates, that hurts. Mr. President, let's come to our senses and vote against this bill. I yield back.
The Democrat leader.
I want to thank my colleague, Senator Welch, the great senator from Vermont, for shining a spotlight on Donald Trump and the Republicans' attack on health care in their so-called big, beautiful bill. Let's be honest about what the Republican bill it really is. It's repeal and replace by another name. Not one fell swoop, but death by 1,000 paper cuts. They're afraid to say they want to kill health care, Medicaid, ACA. So instead, they put so many barriers in the way that, in effect, they do the same thing. They're doing the same with Social Security. We've all heard how this bill will devastate Medicaid. It's the largest cut in history. Every day you learn more about this bill. It gets worse. It includes over $1 trillion in health care cuts. Cuts to the ACA, even cuts to Medicare. We've been learning that Medicare will be hurt as well by the sequestration. And today, if you didn't think it could get worse with this big, ugly bill, it sure did. The CBO just announced that their bill will kick millions more people off their health care than we originally thought. Not only by attacking Medicaid, but by crippling the ACA, private insurance, and even Medicare now. Yesterday, it was 13.7 million people who would lose coverage. Today, it's as high as 16 million. And you know, that's a big number, 16 million. It's families. It's people who need health care. People whose kids might have cancer and they're desperate to get something done. Elderly who are paying so much for medicine that they can't afford to go to a doctor to see if the medicine is working. Families that are just starting out and maybe someone lost his or her job. Yep, 16 million, but that's each a person, a family, a group. The more you look at the House bill, the worse it gets. Enrollment time shortened by an entire month. Wait times longer for everyone at the hospital. 22 million people could see their average premium go up by an average of 93%. Small business owners, 3.3 million, will see their premiums skyrocket. Hospitals, nursing homes, health centers, all at risk. I've been at nursing homes in many parts of my state. Guess what? They're all afraid they're going to close. 60, 70% of their income is Medicaid. That's how they take care of the elderly. And those people will lose their coverage and be forced to leave because the nursing home will close? Well, how about those 45-year-old couples with 3 kids, no extra room in the house, and mom has to come back because she's got no place to go, and there won't be adequate health care there at home? And job loss on this big, ugly bill, this betrayal. 850,000 will lose their jobs in health care alone, another 800,000 in clean energy, many, many more. Millions are losing their jobs. I don't know how the economists would think, but when you lose 2 million jobs, if that's the case, you're right on the edge of a recession, if not in one. And despite all this, Donald Trump has the gall to lie and say that his bill wouldn't harm Americans' health care. He says no one will lose coverage. Ladies and gentlemen, people of America, Donald Trump is lying. The bill will kick people off their health care coverage. It will slash health care benefits. It will close rural hospitals. People will get sicker and die. What did the junior senator from Iowa say? Well, we're all going to die. How about the junior senator from Louisiana? I'm not worried about people losing their health care. It shows the callousness of the Republican senators when it comes to health care. They don't seem to care. They seem to say tough luck. Republicans should forget calling this their one beautiful bill. You know what the new name for this bill is, a more suitable name? The We're All Going to Die Act. The We're All Going to Die Act. Because that just about sums up how callous they're being with the American people. For many Americans, health care is the difference between life and death. Democrats will fight this bill with everything we've got. The American people deserve to know the truth. And one more point I would say to my colleagues. Donald Trump is selling you Republican colleagues a bill of goods. It's not going to hurt anybody. Don't believe his false words, because when you vote for this bill, the effects will actually occur. And the public will realize what you have done. So don't let Donald Trump sell you a bill of goods. We know he makes things up out of the clear blue all the time. He's doing it now. And when he calls you in and tells you that no one's going to be hurt and no one's going to lose coverage, you know that's a crock of you-know-what. Can't say it here. Don't listen to him, because your constituents will pay an awful price in health care, and they will know you did it. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, are we in a quorum call?
We are not, Senator.
Mr. President, I rise today in strong opposition to the President's request to Congress this week to eliminate $9.4 billion in funding that has already been passed and signed into law. Let's say that again. Already passed, signed into law. Anyone that watches Schoolhouse Rock, listens to the song, know how a bill becomes a law. A Republican-led House, at the time a Democratic-led Senate, came together, made an agreement, passed a bill, signed into law by the then president. But this president thinks he can just come in and change everything when it comes to really important things for people in this country that I'm about to get to. That's just not how it works. We got to do our jobs, and people need to stand up and say, this is our part of the job. We make the decisions about the funding. The president can veto them. He can work with us, as you know we could be doing right now. Instead, it's just a one-pony show. But that's how this place works. So what this proposal would do would gut funding that's already been appropriated for broadcasting, public broadcasting, and slash critical international aid funding, programs that had long had bipartisan support. I'm the daughter of a newspaperman. I care a lot about people getting information, getting news. And right now I care a lot about it in rural America because there has been such a breakdown of news coverage of small newspapers that have folded, in part because we won't do anything about the social media companies, about Facebook and Google and how they're able to use the content without being reimbursed. Just let it sit there as their lobbyists come in and stop it. But while we're doing that, in a lot of these areas now, the only news, the only way for them to find out about what's going on with a storm or what's happening with a wildfire or what's even happening with their local softball team or what's happening with the high school or what business is opening or closing is through these sources of public radio and public TV. Public broadcasting reaches nearly 99% of Americans with free programming, delivering life-saving emergency alerts, vital local news, and shows that talk about what's actually happening locally and what's true and what's happening and what events are going on and when they can attend the school fair, all those kinds of things. But President Trump has decided to try to claw back the money Congress has already provided, I guess to pay for these tax cuts for the wealthiest, but to try to claw it back for over 1,500 local and regional public TV and radio stations throughout the country. Many of these stations provide free, high-quality programming to millions of households in rural areas. A lot of them don't even have what they need to see it online, and this is actually how they get their news, but even without that, they're in their cars a lot. They have long ways to drive. They get a lot of stuff off the radio. I know that in my state, this would be particularly devastating. We have a lot of rural areas. Minnesota has a long history of public radio and TV programming. Every week, 20 million people across the country listen to the Minnesota public radio programs that were originally produced by Marketplace, right? Since 1967, its award-winning news operation has documented some of the most important stories of our time. Minnesotans coming from Cambodia, what was happening there? It was public radio that was covering that. In 1988, NPR's Main Street Radio produced a documentary called Against the Grain, which gave rural Minnesotans the mic to talk about how they were handling economic change. In 2007, NPR News covered every detail of the collapse of the 35W bridge, which was, of course, also warnings to people about where they had to go, what was happening, what was closed down. They're covering research on dementia, state plans for K-12 education. The legislative session right now, both the public TV and public radio station are diligently covering every single detail of that, while so many other news organizations have gone away or broken down. What do we want to have? No coverage of a city council in Bemidji, Minnesota? We don't want to know what's happening on Main Street? We don't want to know when a flood comes in, what stores are open and when? Why would we decide to cut ourselves off from information at this moment in time? Public TV, it's a place where so many people get their news. 58% of households watch PBS programming in a year. PBS Kids, 15 million monthly viewers of PBS Kids. And yeah, that's right, they don't get exposed to all the advertising, all the stuff they'd see online because they're watching the PBS Kids. I think that's actually a pretty cool thing for our country, that there's a place that kids can watch these programs. Every month, 36 million Americans watch their local PBS. I was just at KMSQ TV in Austin, Minnesota. I'm sure most of the people haven't heard of it, but boy, the people in Austin, it's pretty important. Tens of thousands of people, that's where they get their news. 72% local carry. The former Republican Senate leader in the state Senate, he's on the board because they know this is a place they can find out about local news or what's happening. It's where they can find out about local news in places like Granite Falls, Minnesota, in places like Bemidji, Minnesota. All across the country, in times of crisis, public radio and TV are essential to public safety. While many other news sources lost power and internet during Hurricane Helene, Asheville's Blue Ridge Public Radio stayed online, bringing life-saving news and information to the over 500,000 people in the region without power. When Hurricane Milton devastated the Tampa area, the local public station, WSF, hosted live call-in shows, aired frequent local news briefings, and maintained a regularly updated live blog with a text-only low bandwidth option to keep residents informed and safe before and after the storm. I have been in so many areas of my state in a time of crisis, of flooding, where you go down there and the mayor in a real small town is sitting there, but he's live streaming on their local public access. Because that's the way. Where else are people going to go? Are they going to try 80 different platforms on social media? Are they going to go and try to figure out which local TV station in the Twin Cities, miles away, are maybe showing something every so often about their problems? They go to public access purely for safety's sake, much less for kids seeing really good programming that's free of all the commercial aspects that are coming kids' ways every single day, or the interesting in-depth kind of reporting you can have on a place like Marketplace for what's happening with the economy, or something to listen to when you're driving for hours and hours and hours that doesn't mean endless ads and endless marketing, because you actually get to hear the news, or you actually get to hear some music you like. That's what public TV and public radio do for us. It's a treasure in our country. Public broadcasting creates a more informed community through quality programming on local and national events. And I think it's really going to be important as we debate this in the next few weeks that remember that local part. It shines a light on the people, places, history, and stories that are the fabric of towns and cities, addressing the most pressing issues. We must support these vital resources that give voice to important local issues that wouldn't otherwise be heard. They're going to be lost to history. It's going to be a further erosion of the fabric. So what do people do instead? Oh, go look on Twitter and see if you can protect your kids from a bunch of bad stuff that's on there. I use that. A bunch of us in here, almost all of us have accounts. It's an important way to reach people. I'm not cutting it down. But I'd much rather have a kid in my state be watching the programming on public radio than looking on social media accounts right now, or be watching it on public TV and listening to the radio. It's a safe space for them to get some programming. The president's request would also deepen the damage this administration has done to our standing in the world through its reckless cuts to foreign aid. Give you one example, the president would impose major cuts to PEPFAR, the program that began under President George W. Bush to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS. Over many years, this program has earned consistent bipartisan support across 4 administrations and 10 Congresses. It's credited with saving over 25 million lives. These programs not only demonstrate Americans' humanitarian leadership, which certainly helps when you need a friend, when there's a conflict going on abroad, and you can point to things that you did working with other countries. They also are good for our country. We know that you just can't bury your head in the sand and hope that these problems in other countries and diseases aren't heading your way. Whether it's Ebola or malaria or bird flu, oftentimes these things come in from other countries. Pandemic, right? They come in from other countries. So why would we at this moment in time cut off our investments in public health and in food aid and other things that are not only right based on your belief that we're part of this world, in your faith or whatever makes you believe that if we can save some lives for a small part of the federal budget in America because we're so good at innovation and we're so good at producing things, and yes, we have some extra food, and yes, we have some rural economy that we want to keep strong, but also just from a purely American selfish version of this. And I don't mean selfish like a bad thing. I mean selfish like looking out for ourselves and our country. You would want to work with the rest of the world so these diseases doesn't come in your doors, or you don't shut out and anger other countries when 90% of our customers, potential customers, are outside of our borders. You want to be able to sell stuff to them. But not if we cut ourselves off from the rest of the world and make fun of them and call them the 51st state. The president's proposed cuts to funding for UNICEF are also misguided. I was one of those kids at Halloween that would go trick-or-treating. I'd have my bag and then this little UNICEF box. So people would put some pennies in, and I learned how much that each of those dimes would mean for food for kids in other countries. We should be at the forefront of supporting brighter futures for children facing the hardships of poverty so the next generation can build strong societies and become close partners with the United States. Think about people that study in our colleges and graduate schools from other countries. Think about what they offer us. Yeah, they pay their way a lot of the time. That helps colleges. But you know what else they do? Sometimes they stay. Sometimes they stay for a few years. Basically, they're getting advanced degrees. They're getting skills that we want them to get. And sometimes we want them to stay in our country. In my mind, we should be stapling a green card to their diplomas. And that is how, when you look at Fortune 500 companies in our country and who's headed it up, a huge amount of them are immigrants or kids of immigrants that were educated in our country. That's such a big part of our economy and our advantage across the world. Why would we be cutting off? Or they go back to their home countries and say, you know, I kind of liked it there. They start a business, then they do business with our country. That's how this has worked. American businesses need access to emerging markets. Many countries that have received U.S. assistance have become important American trading partners. The connection between foreign assistance and American prosperity is especially clear in agriculture. America has proudly fed the world for decades, and food aid has been a critical component of that effort. Food aid is a significant market for American farmers, purchasing over $4.25 billion in American commodities from 20 to 24. Minnesota's farmers and ag businesses sold a total of $70 million in ag products to USAID's Food for Peace program in 2024 alone. Continuing this aid should not be a partisan issue. It never has, or we never would have gotten it done for all these years. It has been completely bipartisan. Some people come at it, as I said, because of their faith and their belief in helping the world. Some people come at it in terms of economics and think this is how we help people, and then this open the markets for us. Some people come at it from a security standpoint, which I mentioned with health, but also applies in other ways. If you help people and you are their friends, it can lead to good things down the line. Mr. President, cutting funding for this international aid, not to mention cutting ourselves off from the information we need, especially in rural areas that so often in news deserts rely on public radio and public TV for their information, is sending our democracy backwards at a time when we are completely connected and should be connected to the rest of the world. These investments, compared to the rest of the federal budget, aren't as big, but their influence in the immediate and in the long term is immense. They strengthen our country at home and strengthen American leadership around the world. This is a test of our values, yeah, but it is also economically the right thing to do. To keep a fragmented country that is ever divided, somewhat on the same plane, by their kids having a public TV program to watch and learn from their community being able to tune in and watch a local sports game, or able to get their news about what happened on their city council and talk about it the next day. So one person says, I don't know what happened. I read this on Facebook. And the other person says, no, that's not true. I actually saw the local news in Austin, and I saw what it said on our local public TV network. They don't even maybe know what that is, but they know what it is, and this is what I found out. That's how people can come to some common agreement about what's happening in our world, and there's no better place to start than on a local level, which is why when you talk to Republican or Democratic mayors or city council members, they'll tell you, if we don't have that, how are we ever going to debate this levy proposal? How are we ever going to get people to understand why we have to make a decision about the school and whether we close it down or whether we expand it or whether we close another school down? How are they ever going to have that without a public access station? In this day and age, this idea that what are we going to do? Just expect everyone to go out when they've got 3 kids, they're supposed to go out to every single meeting and watch it themselves? Or they're supposed to rely that maybe it's going to get the right information on Twitter, but they're not sure if that person's telling the truth or that person's telling the truth? Or we are going to give them the first front line of information, which is what C-SPAN does, by the way, which is why Senator Grassley and I are trying to make sure that we get that C-SPAN on platforms like YouTube, owned by Google, by Hulu, owned by Disney, in the modern day. And same thing here. I want to make sure there are some sources where people can gather and look at this news and know they're getting something quality, know they're getting something either that entertains them with music, without every single song having an ad in the middle of it, and that they're able to get the news they need to be good citizens of this great country. That's what's on the line with these rescissions. I yield the floor. I note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsop Brooks.
President,
I recognize
Are we
the
in a quorum
Democrat
call?
whip. Yes,
I ask unanimous consent the quorum call be suspended.
without objection.
So a lot of people are asking the question, Mr. President, what exactly were people voting for in the last presidential election? Well, many things. We have many citizens who are voters in this country. But the recurring theme seems to be the cost of living for the average family. The ability of mothers and fathers to make ends meet and to see a realization of their dreams and aspirations. But we were told over and over again that families across this country were being overwhelmed by the cost of living, gas, groceries, housing. And so they gave a majority of the votes to President Trump, who promised he would make America great again. Since taking office, I don't believe that the president has come near to keeping his promise. Instead, he has hired many of his billionaire buddies and cut deals with the ultra-wealthy that will harm the same Americans who voted for him. I'm not going to get into his cryptocurrency schemes and how it's enriched him and his family. Let's set that aside for a minute and talk about issues that apply to every person. Hidden in more than 1,000 pages in the bill that passed the House of Representatives is a plan, a laundry list of things that I don't believe the Americans even considered voting for in the last November election. They're going to have a devastating impact on families in states red and blue alike. The main takeaway from this is the one big, ugly bill, billionaires are going to win and American families are going to lose. Do you think the voters in last November's election for President of the United States would actually vote to close down their local hospital? That's what's looming. Now you say, oh, you Democrats and your scare tactics. That can't possibly be true. Well, let me tell you what happened, Mr. President. 3 weeks ago, 20 hospital administrators from across the state of Illinois, from Chicago down to the southernmost part of our state, all took a special trip to Washington to warn me that the bill that was pending before the House of Representatives threatened the survival of hospitals across our state. These are hospitals which are not only critical for providing professional medical care, delivering babies, saving people's lives who are in automobile accidents, but also major parts of the local economy. You come to rural, small-town, Midwest America and ask the impact of the local hospital, and they'll tell you, we don't know that we could keep a business or attract a business if we didn't have it. We count on it every day to be there when we need it. And secondly, it's a major employer. In fact, in most towns, the biggest employer in downstate. And then they warn me, many of these hospitals are hanging on by a thread. The money that they receive from government insurance programs like Medicaid keeps the doors open and the lights on and the doctors in town. And now we have a proposal from the Republicans to cut that Medicaid benefit for 16 million Americans. This would be the largest cutback in health insurance protection in the history of the United States. That's what's been sent over by the House of Representatives and is presently under consideration by the Republican leadership here in the Senate. Nationwide, half of all rural hospitals already operate in the red, and more than 300 rural hospitals are at immediate risk of closure. 26 in Kansas, 22 in Alabama, 9 in Missouri. How many closed hospitals will the Republicans accept as part of their plan? Let me tell you, I'm from downstate Illinois, proud to represent the city of Chicago all these years, but prouder still of being from downstate and trying to keep track of all the needs that they have for this economy to prosper. I know rural hospitals are the backbone of many communities in downstate Illinois, critical emergency medical care, anchors of the local economy. Now you dig into this deeply into this Republican budget bill that's come over from the House of Representatives, and it turns out they are not just eliminating health insurance coverage for 16 million Americans, they are also cutting Medicare. Now, Medicare is a program primarily for elderly people in this country. It has been a miracle worker. Medicare was created in the 1960s, and it's no coincidence or surprise that the life expectancy of Americans went up as Medicare took root and became part of health care in America. Despite promising to leave Medicare alone, which everyone has said from Donald Trump on down, Republicans couldn't help themselves. They slashed Medicare benefits and reduced access to hospitals, nursing homes, and medications for seniors in all 50 states, Medicaid and Medicare. So why would Republicans in Congress take a wrecking ball to these two major parts of our healthcare system? To provide money for tax breaks to the wealthiest people in America. I'll bet you think he's making that up. I'll bet you it's another one of those political schemes of his. It's not being made up. It's true. They want to generate enough money to give tax breaks to wealthy people. Based on a new update from the Congressional Budget Office today, up to 16 million Americans are now estimated to lose their health insurance coverage under this Republican plan that passed the House and is now being considered by the Senate Republicans. I can just tell you this from a personal basis, there is no more helpless feeling in the world than to be a father with no health insurance and being told that your beautiful baby has a serious medical complication. I know, I've been there. Some Republicans are downplaying these catastrophic health cuts. On the Senate floor earlier today, a Republican senator said that people on Medicaid are lazy and play video games all day. At a recent town hall meeting, when a concerned constituent raised the Republican proposal, Medicaid cuts, and said that people would die, there became a great controversy, the response of the senator to that comment. It sounds like Republicans in Congress want to be the ones deciding who is worthy of health care in America. But Americans who depend on Medicaid are not strangers. They're your neighbors. They're people at your church, your school, and at your work. It probably is your family, too. If you or a loved one gets sick, will congressional Republicans deem you deserving of seeing a doctor? Is that what this debate was all about? Is that what this election was all about? Did the American people vote for tax cuts for billionaires? I don't think so. A party like the Republicans, who claim they're the party of the working class billionaires, they refuse to put their money where their mouth is. Republicans in Congress may say they're just trying to lower your taxes, but most of the benefit is going to wealthy people who won't even notice it. Maybe their bookkeepers and accountants will give them the good news that they just saved another $200,000 or $300,000 in taxes. Under the Republican plan, taxpayers and the wealthiest 0.1% would get a $300,000 tax cut every year. $300,000 for the richest of the richest in America. Why? At the expense of health care for 16 million Americans? It makes no sense. The average full-time worker making a minimum wage on average would receive a tax break as well. I've got to be honest about it. It's $20 a month. $300,000 for the richest of the rich, $20 a month for the working stiff. How can that possibly be fair? Did the American people vote to slash jobs across the economy in the last November election? I don't think so. Since we passed the Inflation Reduction Act, 85% of investment in clean energy technology has landed in Republican districts. Now, I know the President of the United States calls global warming and environmental issues a hoax. He's been hanging with that story for a long time, even though we know something is happening. Notice the extreme weather events across the United States and around the world. They're getting more frequent and more costly. Is it a coincidence or is something going on? I happen to believe something's going on. In just 2 years since passing the Inflation Reduction Act, businesses have announced 340 new clean technology projects. One estimate says that these projects will create 150,000 permanent jobs. I've seen it in my state. That includes more than 9,000 jobs in Texas, 4,800 in Ohio, 4,500 in Indiana, and 2,700 in my home state of Illinois. The Republicans' big, ugly bill puts these jobs at risk, taking a hatchet to tax policy that make these projects possible. The promise of a Republican repeal has already scared the private sector into withdrawing $14 billion in investment and canceling 10,000 clean energy manufacturing jobs. Why would the so-called party of the working class want to give their own constituents a pink slip? I don't get it. Now, some of my Republican colleagues have been brave enough to raise alarms about the Medicaid cuts, roll back clean energy credits, and the cost of the bill. You know what the cost of this bill is to give tax breaks to the wealthiest people? $3.8 trillion more on the deficit over the next decade. We already know the scammer-in-chief will try to bully Republicans into choosing billionaires over working families, using anything he can to persuade them or threaten them. My Republican colleagues must know that this plan does not make America great again. It makes our debt the greatest in the history of our nation. But instead, it harms families in red and blue states looking for a fair shot. Their lip service to these terrible cuts is not enough. I urge a handful of my Republican colleagues, and that's all it takes. Show some courage, show some common sense, tell the folks in the House and tell the White House as well, this approach is not going to work. Taking health insurance away from 16 million Americans, more than has ever happened in the history of this country, is unfair, fundamentally unfair, and we all know it. We know it intuitively. That's just not fair. Taking Medicaid away from reimbursing hospitals and doctors with critical care in small towns and rural areas is a mistake that we'll pay for generations to come. I urge my Republicans to listen to their constituents, because I know that Americans who voted for Trump in November did not vote for what I've just described today on the floor of the Senate. We need 4 Republicans, 4, to stand up and say, this doesn't make sense. Too much debt, too much pain for families, too much of a gamble for rural areas and small-town America. We've got to stand up and make a much better effort, and we should do it on a bipartisan basis as quickly as possible. Mr. President, I yield the floor. Thank you. No, I don't. Thank you.
I recognize the senator from Rhode Island.
In my effort to alert our somnolent body to the looming dangers of climate change, since President Trump's inauguration in January, he has embarked upon a series of actions that quite simply defy reality. They obey the fossil fuel industry, but they defy reality. Or maybe it's the other way around. They defy reality to obey the fossil fuel industry. On his very first day in office, he issued an executive order declaring that wind energy and solar energy are not energy. This defies even the dictionary, and it ignores the fact that humans have been harnessing wind and solar power since well before we started combusting fossil fuels. In March, Trump's EPA administrator announced his intention to undo the agency's finding that carbon pollution endangers human health and welfare, despite the fact that the harms and costs associated with climate change become more evident every day. In May, Jeff Clark, who runs the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs at OMB, part of the OMB fossil fuel stooge platoon, best known for his involvement in crooked Keystone Cops' efforts to overturn the 2020 election, issued a memo directing agencies to stop using the social cost of carbon in agency decision-making. Again, despite the fact that we know that carbon pollution costs the government and the public money, lots of money. Now we hear that Trump's EPA is readying to rescind a rule limiting carbon pollution from certain fossil fuel-fired power plants on the pretense that emissions from these plants do not significantly contribute to climate change, despite the fact that the carbon pollution from fossil fuel-fired U.S. power plants is greater than all the carbon pollution from all but 6 countries in the world. It's a major contributor. Put simply, in Trump's world, facts don't matter, and the truth is whatever his fossil fuel donors say it is. And now this fossil fuel influence operation has actually infiltrated its way into government, and it is effecting the fossil fuel industry's desires from inside. This would be a sorry enough state of affairs by itself. A president of the United States who ignores facts and lives in a phony alternate reality of a polluting industry's making. But it gets worse when others modulate their own worldviews and actions to rely less on facts, on the immutable laws of nature and economics, and instead on nonsensical utterances about climate change and wacko energy policy. Take our Fed chair, Jerome Powell. After admitting to Senator Tina Smith on the Senate Banking Committee in February that climate change would make it impossible to get insurance and therefore impossible to get mortgages in certain coastal and wildfire-exposed regions of the country, he fell into line behind Trumpian denialism. 3 days before Trump's inauguration, he pulled the Fed out of an international network of central banks that researches climate-related financial and economic risks. The European Central Bank and the central banks of China, Canada, Mexico, Japan, the UK, and more than 80 other countries are members. But not us. Not anymore. Then in May, the Fed pressured an international banking supervision organization to disband its task force overseeing climate risk. Thankfully, the other central banks refused. Last, the Fed dissolved its own climate risk working groups. Can't have those anymore, not when our polluter-funded dear leader says it's all a hoax. Or take Daniel Yergin, Peter Orszag, and Atul Arya, three people who should know better. They waited barely a month after Trump's inauguration before publishing a 5,000-word manifesto in Foreign Affairs in defense of what they call energy pragmatism. What is energy pragmatism, you might ask? Basically, it's a Trump-friendly and factually challenged theory that transitioning to green energy is too complicated and expensive, so we may as well resolve ourselves to using fossil fuels for a long, long time to come. Despite its 5,000-word length and despite its inclusion of a section entitled "It's the Economy," this piece never mentioned the massive costs and systemic economic risks already looming from climate change. Quite an omission, literally only one side of the case. Which brings me back to the social cost of carbon. There was a time when Republicans were the great champions of cost-benefit analysis. Ronald Reagan was the first to mandate its use in the regulatory process. Obviously far from perfect, it does make sense to have a monetary estimate of the costs and benefits associated with a particular regulatory action. That is the social cost of carbon. It calculates the climate-related costs from adding an additional ton of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere, or alternatively, the benefits from removing or eliminating a ton of carbon pollution. The social cost of carbon is not a new concept. Economists have been using it for decades. Yet Clark's memo argues that the social cost of carbon shouldn't be used because a monetized estimate of the cost of 1 ton of carbon pollution is too uncertain. So they recommend 0. Well, first of all, we do know one thing about this, and that is that the cost isn't 0. Our own lived experiences teach us that. And there's actually case law to the effect that the number is not 0. We also know it's not even close to 0. Every serious academic estimate of the social cost of carbon is well north of $50, with most well over $100 per ton. EPA's last estimate, informed by copious academic research, was $190 per ton in harm from carbon dioxide. The International Monetary Fund calculates that there is a subsidy to the fossil fuel industry in the United States every single year of $700 billion, which is their valuation of the pollute-for-free fossil fuel business model. You can back calculate from that to an effective cost of carbon pollution of around $150 per ton. Whether $150 per ton or $190 per ton, these weren't even the highest estimates out there. There are credible estimates in the hundreds of dollars per ton. Much of the variation among the costs comes from the choice of what damage you attempt to quantify. For example, that EPA estimate at $190 per ton only looked at 4 harms. It only looked at increased mortality, damage to agriculture, increased energy costs, and damage from sea level rise. Those 4 things. It did not consider the systemic financial and economic risks from climate change of the sort that I have discussed so frequently in this body, the ones to which Fed Chair Powell alluded when he admitted that climate change would render parts of our country uninsurable and hence unmortgageable. That is a huge, looming economic blow, not in the EPA calculation. In other words, almost all estimates of the social cost of carbon are underestimates because they do not attempt to quantify all climate-related costs and damages. Trump's polluter-run OMB wants us to ignore all of this. The logic is really stunning here, or I should probably say the illogic, because they say it's not clear what number is right, we'll use 0, a number we know is wrong. That simply doesn't make sense, but it does solve the problem of the fossil fuel industry having to account for the harm that it causes. It is a massive favor to the fossil fuel industry. So be clear, this is yet another oily fossil fuel thumb pressed down on the scale to help big polluters. Climate pollution is a global problem. Our emissions harm Americans and the rest of the world. Chinese emissions harm the Chinese and the rest of the world. And harms that occur to people in other countries end up having real costs here at home as well. Some of them fall in the national security space. Take the Syrian civil war, which destabilized the Middle East and led to periodic American military intervention. A long-term severe drought exacerbated by climate change is widely understood to have played a role in that conflict. Look at nuclear-armed India and Pakistan, which have been at odds for decades. As glaciers shrink in the Himalayas due to climate change, water becomes eventually more scarce, raising tensions as these adversaries compete for a dwindling supply of that essential need. Then there are the Northern Triangle countries of Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, hit hard by a drought made worse by climate change. The drought made it harder for subsistence farmers to eke out a living, contributing to the surge in migration to the U.S. Faraway events have economic effects here at home as well. A drought in Panama lowers water in the Panama Canal and slows shipping, making it more expensive. A drought or flood hits a major agricultural exporter and makes food here at home more expensive. A flood in Thailand swamps factories and provokes a shortage here in car parts. The global economy is interconnected. Climate-related droughts, floods, fires, and storms in foreign lands impose real costs on Americans here at home. The legions of bootlickers who orbit around Trump remind me of the legend of King Canute. King Canute, like President Trump today, was surrounded by hordes of flattering courtiers. Unlike President Trump, King Canute was displeased by his courtiers' relentless flattery that he was all-powerful. So, to give his courtiers a lesson, King Canute set his throne by the sea edge and commanded the incoming tide to halt so as not to wet his feet. Well, of course, the tide took no mind of King Canute's words, continued its advance, and washed over his feet. King Canute exclaimed, "Let all men know how empty and worthless is the power of kings, for there is none worthy of the name but he whom heaven, earth, and sea obey by eternal laws." Well, those words should particularly resonate today, because climate change is real, and it is driven by eternal laws, by the natural laws of chemistry, for instance, and physics. And a latter-day ersatz king saying otherwise makes no difference at all to the natural systems of this planet driven by nature's laws. Climate change is going to be very expensive, very disruptive, and very damaging. The warnings are already everywhere, and Florida's insurance crisis is a preview of coming attractions for all America's coastal communities. I won't dwell in this speech on that list of warnings. I spoke over and over about the many different agencies and experts, from insurance industry CEOs to insurance industry board members to the chairman of the Federal Reserve to the chief economist of Freddie Mac to the Economist magazine to the International Financial Stability Board, and on and on and on. It is over and over the same warning. The warning that climate change is disrupting the planet so much that risks are becoming so unpredictable that insurance is becoming either flat out unavailable or unaffordable on its way to unavailable, and that insurance crisis quickly spills over into a mortgage crisis, because you cannot get a mortgage on a property on which you cannot get insurance, and that mortgage crisis cascades into a crash in property values, because if you bought your home with a mortgage, you probably need to sell it to somebody who needs a mortgage, and if you can't sell to that entire population of human beings who need a mortgage to buy your house, because your house won't sustain a mortgage because it can't get insurance, then your market just crashed and the value of your home did as well. I've shown here at this podium the map from First Street that predicted what, in the time period of a 30-year mortgage, is going to happen to home values around the country from this insurance to mortgage to values cascade. And in some places, the loss of value was at 100%, a zeroing out. But even where the loss of value is going to be 20% or 40%, think what that does to that community, where all of the property in that community has lost that much value. Think of what that does to the community bank in that community and its solvency, its loan-to-value ratio, when the value of the collateral for its loans has crashed 20 to 40%. This is coming. And there's an answer. Renewable energy and low-carbon technologies, already cheap, getting cheaper. Plus, whoever dominates those industries will dominate the 21st century. So let's protect ourselves from that looming threat. Let's make sure that who dominates the 21st century in energy is the United States. Let's not give away America's position in that competition to our foreign rivals just to humor a corrupt political influence effort here at home. That would be a disgraceful outcome, but it is the one we are headed for. With that, I yield the floor. Mr. McCormick.
The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks.
Speaker, I ask quorum call be.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Under the previous order, the question occurs on the Bowman nomination. Is there a sufficient second? There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks, Ms. Baldwin, Mr. Banks, Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt Rochester, Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman.
Yes.
Mrs. Britt. Mr. Budd. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy, Ms. Collins, Mr. Coons, Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto, Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. James, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Langford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young, Senators voting in the affirmative: Bozeman, Justice, Moreno, Paul, and Sullivan. Senators voting in the negative: Cortez Masto, Kane, Klobuchar, Lujan, Merkley, Sanders, Schiff, Shaheen, and Whitehouse. Mr. Ricketts, aye. Ms. Hassan, no. Mr. Wyden, no. Ms. Smith, no. Mr. Markey, no. Mr. Murphy, no. Mr. Graham, aye. Mr. Kennedy, aye. Mr. King, no. Mr. Grassley. Mr. Grassley, aye. Mr. Reed. Mr. Reed, no. Mr. Van Hollen. Mr. Van Hollen, no. Mr. Warner. Mr. Warner, no. Mr. Padilla. Mr. Padilla, no. Mrs. Blackburn. Mrs. Blackburn, aye. Mr. Rounds. Mr. Rounds, aye. Ms. Collins. Ms. Collins, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mrs. Murray. Mrs. Murray, no. Mr. Welch. Mr. Welch, no. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson, aye. Ms. Baldwin. Ms. Baldwin, no. Ms. Warren. Ms. Warren, no. Mr. Cassidy. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Cornyn. Mr. Cornyn, aye. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Tillis, aye. Mr. Kim. Mr. Kim, no. Ms. Rosen. Ms. Rosen, no. Mr. Schatz. Mr. Schatz, no. Mr. Young. Mr. Young, aye. Mr. Heinrich. Mr. Heinrich, no. Mr. Scott of South Carolina, aye. Mr. Banks, aye. Mrs. Moody, aye. Mr. Husted, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Mr. Durbin, no. Mr. Kramer, aye. Mr. Cruz, aye. Mr. Wicker, aye. Mr. Coons, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Mrs. Britt, aye. Ms. Lummis, aye. Mr. Mullen, aye. Mr. Schumer, no. Mr. Moran, aye. Mr. Hawley, aye. Mr. Risch, aye. Ms. Ernst, aye. Mr. Barrasso. Mr. Barrasso, aye. Mr. Fetterman. Mr. Fetterman, no.
I heard you were looking for me. I called you back.
Mr. Curtis. Mr. Curtis, aye. Mr. Houston. Mr. Haggerty. Mr. Haggerty, aye. Mr. Hoven. Mr. Hoven, aye. Mrs. Hyde-Smith. Mrs. Hyde-Smith, aye.
Megan.
Mr. Hickenlooper. Mr. Hickenlooper, no.
Sorry, this has just been a bad day.
Ms. Duckworth. Ms. Duckworth, no. Mr. McConnell. Mr. McConnell, aye. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Crapo, aye. Ms. Murkowski. Ms. Murkowski, aye. Mrs. Fisher. Mrs. Fisher, aye. Mr. Budd. Mr. Budd, aye. Mr. Lee, aye. Mr. Thune, aye. Mr. McCormick, aye. Mr. Gallego, Mr. Gallego, no. Mr. Kelly, no. Ms. Hirono, no. Ms. Cantwell, no. Mr. Bennett, no. Mr. Tuberville, aye. Mr. Booker, no. Ms. Alsobrooks, no. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Ms. Slotkin, no. Mr. Schmidt, aye. Mr. Peters, no. Mr. Blumenthal, no. Mr. Marshall, aye.
gotta do important stuff. That's the whole. Okay. On this vote, the yeas are 48 and the nays are 46. The nomination is confirmed. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the president will immediately notify the Senate of the Senate's actions. Under the previous order, the question occurs on the Walsh nomination. There is sufficient second. There appears to be. The clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsabrooks. Warner, Booker. No. Wait. Kennedy. Moody. Kennedy. Thank you. Risch. Blumenthal. Hold on just a moment, please. Warren, Smith.
I am whatever Republicans are.
I'll get you. Ms. Baldwin.
Scott.
Thank you.
Aye.
I got you, too. Will you check to see if Warner voted aye on the cloture? Got you. Mr. Banks. Yes. Durbin, Van Hollen, Padilla. Mr. Barrasso, Mr. Bennett. Mrs. Blackburn. Mr. Blumenthal. Thank you. Thank you. I did, sir. Thank you. Have a good one. Ms. Blunt Rochester. Thank you. Was he? What was he on cloture? Warner? I'll get him. I'll get him in a second. Just a second. Mr. Booker, Mr. Bozeman, Mrs. Britt, Mr. Budd, Ms. Cantwell. I wait. I got you. Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Cantwell. Mrs. Capito, Mr. Cassidy. Ms. Collins. Mr. Kins. Mr. Cornyn, Ms. Cortez Masto. Mr. Cotton, Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo, Mr. Cruz, Mr. Curtis, Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin, Ms. Ernst, Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, thanks, Mr. Gallego, Mrs. Gillibrand, Mr. Graham, Mr. Grassley, Mr. Haggerty. Thank you. Ms. Hassan, Mr. Hawley, Mr. Heinrich, Mr. Hickenlooper, Ms. Hirono, Mr. Hoven, Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde-Smith, Mr. Johnson, Mr. Justice, Mr. Kane, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy, Mr. Kim, Mr. King, Ms. Klobuchar, Mr. Lankford, Mr. Lee, Mr. Lujan, Ms. Lummis, Mr. Markey, Mr. Marshall, Mr. McConnell, Mr. McCormick, Mr. Merkley, Mrs. Moody, Mr. Moran, Mr. Marino, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Murkowski, Mr. Murphy, Mrs. Murray, Mr. Ossoff, Mr. Padilla, Mr. Paul, Mr. Peters, Mr. Reed, Mr. Ricketts, Mr. Risch, Ms. Rosen, Mr. Rounds, Mr. Sanders, Mr. Schatz, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Schmidt, Mr. Schumer, Mr. Scott of Florida, Mr. Scott of South Carolina, Mrs. Shaheen, Mr. Sheehy, Ms. Slotkin, Ms. Smith, Mr. Sullivan, Mr. Thune, Mr. Tillis, Mr. Tuberville, Mr. Van Hollen, Mr. Warner, Mr. Warnock, Ms. Warren, Mr. Welch, Mr. Whitehouse, Mr. Wicker, Mr. Wyden, Mr. Young, Senators voting in the affirmative: Banks, Barrasso, Blackburn, Bozeman, Britt, Budd, Collins, Cornyn, Kramer, Crapo, Cruz, Curtis, Daines, Ernst, Fetterman, Fisher, Graham, Grassley, Haggerty, Hawley, Husted, Hyde-Smith, Johnson, Justice, Kane, Kennedy, King, Lee, Marshall, McConnell, McCormick, Moody, Moran, Marino, Mullen, Murkowski, Reed, Ricketts, Risch, Rounds, Schmidt, Scott of South Carolina, Shaheen, Thune, Tillis, Tuberville, Warner, Wicker, and Young. I do. Senators voting in the negative: also Brooks, Baldwin, Bennett, Blumenthal, Booker, Cantwell, Coons, Cortez Masto, Duckworth, Durbin, Gallego, Hassan, Heinrich, Hickenlooper, Hirono, Kelly, Kim, Markey, Merkley, Murphy, Murray, Padilla, Peters, Schatz, Schumer, Slotkin, Smith, Van Hollen, Warren, and Wyden. Mr. Lankford, aye. Mr. Welch, aye. Ms. Rosen, no. Can I have a... Mr. Sanders, no. Mr. Whitehouse, no. Mr. Schiff, no. Mr. Cassidy, aye. Mr. Scott of Florida, aye. Ms. Klobuchar, aye. Mrs. Gillibrand, no. Mr. Warnock, no. Ms. Blunt Rochester, no. Mr. Lujan, no. Mr. Paul, aye.
Okay. On this vote, the yeas are 57, the nays are 38. The nomination is confirmed. Okay, number 4 again. Here we go. Under the previous order, the motion to reconsider is considered made and laid upon the table, and the president will be immediately notified of the Senate's actions.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate resume legislative session and be in a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I have 5 requests for committees to meet during today's session of the Senate. They have the approval of the majority and minority leaders.
Duly noted.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 262, which is at the desk.
The clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 262 to authorize testimony, document production, and representation by the Senate Legal Counsel in the case of Unre, architect of the Capitol employment dispute.
Without objection, the Senate will proceed to the measure.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it stand adjourned until 10 a.m. on Thursday, June 5th, following the prayer and pledge. The morning hour be deemed expired. The journal proceedings be approved today at the time for the 2 leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. Morning business be closed. The Senate proceed to executive session. Resume consideration of executive calendar number 144, James O'Neill, under the previous order. Further, notwithstanding Rule 22, the cloture motions filed during Tuesday's session of the Senate ripened following disposition of the O'Neill nomination, and if cloture is invoked on the Eisenberg nomination, the post-cloture time expire at 1:45 p.m. tomorrow. Finally, if cloture is invoked on the Shoemate nomination, all post-cloture time be expired, and the Senate vote on the confirmation of the Shoemate nomination at a time to be determined by the majority leader in consultation with Democrat leader on Monday, June 9th.
Can I yell yay? Without objection.
And, Mr. President, if there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it stand adjourned under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned till 10 a.m. tomorrow.